Good morning, Olson scholars. I know you guys are ready for a great day. Tell me you're ready to greet me by shouting out our saying, hoot, hoot, hoot. Outstanding. Today we are going to continue on life in colonial America. We became a British colony, and it was a more loosely governed colony based on how Britain ran its affairs back home in Mother England. And we are going to talk about the wealth distribution of the older of the. Hold on. All right, let me place this here. I'm working on two screens, so I have two screens here. Let's get this. There we go. All right. Now, basically, for English colonists, land was the foundation of real wealth. Okay. If you were a landowner, most landowners were white men. In the 1700s, gentry, those people who could afford to have people work for them, could afford to own slaves and whatnot, they built mansions to display their wealth and filled them with fine furniture, silver, and porcelain. All right, let's talk about the trades and occupations. Okay, I skipped that last line there. Um, Artisans, young boys became apprentices, individuals placed under legal contracts to work for another person in exchange for learning a trade. Artisans made silver, cabinets, tinware, pottery, and glassware. A lot of carpenters, especially, because most houses were built of wood. All right, printers. Colonial printers were considered vital because they gathered and circulated local news and information. All right, Ben Franklin, one of the America's favorite, most famous printers, that's why he became famous, published Poor Richard's Almanac. An almanac is a book containing information such as cloud calendars, weather predictions, and advice. Thus, it had to be timely and it had to be printed pretty much daily. Farmers. Farms in the colonies varied in size from large cash crop plantations in the South to small self-supporting farms in the Middle East, the Middle and New England colonies. Okay. Fish was dried. Fishermen fish was dried, salted, and shipped out from harbored cities. Fishing became a strong industry and promoted the growth of shipbuilding. Many immigrants came to the colonies as indentured servants. Many did. They had a contract. Well, if you carry me over to America, I will work for you for a certain amount of years, and then I will be done, and then I can go and live my life. That was not the case for many Africans. Uh, Pretty much all Africans, they were not brought over here as indentured servants under a work contract. They were actually taken from Africa and forced to work and build a country. Colonial women. Women and the law. Under English common law, a husband had complete control over his wife. Women could not own property, vote, hold office, or serve on a jury. Husbands were allowed to beat their wives. British society was very crude and crass back then. Women's duties. Uh, Cooking, gardening, washing, cleaning, weaving cloth, sewing, assisting other women in childbirth, training daughters to do all the above. That seems like a very limited life when we know that women are quite capable of being doctors, lawyers, judges, president even. They're capable of doing all of those things. And in that period, we were really behind in our thinking, I would say. Thus, I would say it was pretty repressive to women in the early days of our history. The nature of work. We are a nation of workers. The goal of the colonial household was to be self sufficient. self-sufficient, able to make everything needed to maintain itself. That's what we always try to push our children to be. Not need us for everything. Everyone in the house worked to produce food and goods. Men grew crops or made goods like shoes, guns, and candles. Women ran the household and assisted with crops. Children helped both parents. So everybody in the household, the colonial household, had to work. It's just what it was. And colonial education. During colonial times, children received very little formal education. Because Puritans believed everyone should be able to read the Bible, the New England colonies became early leaders in the development of public education. In 1647, Massachusetts passed a law requiring towns to set up grammar schools for boys. Girls were expected to learn from their mothers at home. Generally, only the wealthy attended college, where they trained to be lawyers or ministers. Harvard, Yale, and William and Mary were the only three colleges in the colonies until the 1740s. The oldest countries, William and Mary, I know, is the oldest university in the country. The Middle Passage. Let's talk about slavery. The Middle Passage and how this country was actually built. It was built on the backs of enslaved people. The Middle Passage was one leg of the triangular trade between America's Europe and Africa. This term also refers to the forced transport of slaves from Africa to the Americas. Roughly 10 to 40% of Africans on slave ships died during the crossing. Slaves were beaten and had to endure chains, heat, and cramped, unsanitary conditions. Occasionally, enslaved Africans staged a mutiny or revolt on the slave ships. Many of these were actually successful. Amistad. I remember the movie Amistad, if you ever look at that. That was a very good movie. And it was a successful mutiny. Okay, so they weren't laying down and just accepting being captured, but unfortunately, when you can get a person tied down and put on a ship out in the middle of the ocean, you can control them a lot better than you get him off the ship and he's in a place where he doesn't know what's going on and he's surrounded by a bunch of people who believe he's inferior. You usually, just try to survive. Slavery in the colonies, very important. This is what we deal with now. South Carolina, well, not now. We don't have slavery in the colonies, but we are wrestling with understanding the history of it. South Carolina and Georgia. High temperatures and disease made slave conditions especially harsh in this region. African Americans made up the majority of the population of South Carolina and more than one-third of Georgia's population. Southern slaves kept their culture alive through their speech, craft, and music, the blues, gospel, those sorts of things. Virginia and Maryland. Slaves in the Virginia and Maryland made up a minority of the population. A few of those slaves came directly from Africa. Slaves and had other tasks in addition to growing crops. There was more integration of European American and African American cultures than in South Carolina and Georgia. To save money, slave owners encouraged slaves to have families. Like they used to say, we will increase our stock. I have a slave and I have a lady slave. They make baby slaves. Well, I own all of them at that point. New England and the Middle Colonies. There were far fewer slaves in New England and the Middle Colonies than in the South. They just didn't have enough capacity. They didn't have enough labor needs because they weren't able to grow as many things. Slaves had more freedom to choose their occupations. Slaves in this region typically worked as cooks, housekeepers, and personal servants. They did have slavery in New England. They also worked as skilled artisans, dock workers, merchant sailors, fishermen, whalers, privateers, lumberjacks, and in manufacturing. Estimated African population from 1690 to 1750. Let's look and see what happens. Year 1690. Wow. New England colonies, about 950. Middle colonies, 2,000. Southern colonies, 13,000. Let's look and watch how it grows. 1700. Wow. 1710. 36,000. 1720. So you will see how quickly the slave populations grew, and it caused them to feel a little bit uneasy, or it caused both sides to feel uneasy. We'll talk about that when we start developing the Constitution and representation. 1750, 204,702 slaves. Wow. In the southern colonies. And free black people. Slaves that earned money as artisans or laborers had the possibility of saving enough to purchase their freedom. I'm sorry. Free Africans did the same kind of work as enslaved African Americans, but were often worse off economically and socially. Well, they had to fend for themselves. They had nobody making sure that, because it was not in anybody's interest that people who I have to pay, um, I would make sure that they were healthy and that they had enough of their needs met. Free African American, okay. And so it was a little bit harder for free black people in doing that, even though slavery was brutal. That whole institution actually maintained itself as a function of continuing to make money. Free blacks face poorer living conditions and more discrimination than slaves who were identified with specific white households. So it's basically who owned you determined your status. And free blacks could not vote, testify in court, or marry white people. And the laws, slaves could not go aboard ships or ferries or leave the town limits without a written pass. Slaves could be accused of crimes ranging from owning hogs or carrying skeins to disturbing the peace for striking a white person. Punishments included whipping, banishment to the West Indies, and in some cases, death. Revolts. In the Stono Rebellion, several dozen slaves in South Carolina killed more than 20 white people. The rebels were captured and killed. The New York City had a slave rebellions in 1708, 1712, and 1741. After the 1741 revolt, 13 Africans were burned alive as punishment. They were really brutal. And African Americans undertook almost 50 documented revolts between 1740 and 1800. Okay, we'll go into Western expansion a little bit later, and we'll stop here for now and just digest that, and I'll put notes up in the notebook for you guys later. Enjoy yourself and have a wonderful day.